The morning, three black SUVs turned onto Willow Lane. Nobody in Reedville recognized the women who stepped out. They carried themselves like people who had learned, the hard way, that the world wasn't going to make room for them. So they made their own. But when the youngest one held up a small, worn wooden bird, one wing chipped, the paint rubbed smooth from years of small hands. The oldest man on the porch went completely still. His name was Marcus Webb, and 10 years ago, this town had laughed at him. They laughed when a widower with empty pockets and a leaking roof said he would take in 3 little girls that nobody else would keep together. They laughed because he had nothing, no money, no connections, no wife, no blueprint for what he was trying to do. But here's what they missed. He had the one thing those girls had never once been given before. He stayed. And what those 3 women did the morning they came back, what they built, what they said in front of the whole town, and what Marcus said to them before bed that night, is a story about what real family actually costs and what it's worth. Stay with me, because the moment that broke this town wide open, and the words that will stay with you long after this video ends, are coming, and you won't want to miss a single one. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 10 years before those SUVs rolled down Willow Lane, Marcus Webb did not look like a man anyone would call remarkable. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered, calloused-handed, and already worn the way that comes from years of physical work that pays just barely enough. He repaired roofs in the summer heat. He hauled lumber. He unloaded trucks, cleared storm debris, and patched up sheds for people who paid him less than the job was worth. At the end of most days, red clay, dust, lived in the lines of his skin no matter how hard he scrubbed. He owned very little: an old pickup, a few tools, a kitchen table with one leg reinforced by a wedge of folded cardboard, bills stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a peach. That was about it. But before loss hollowed him out, before Reedville reduced him to the man in the little house on Willow Lane, Marcus Webb had been a husband. His wife's name was Diane. Diane laughed with her whole body. She sang in the kitchen when she cooked and talked to flowers like they were shy children who needed encouragement. For years, she and Marcus tried to have a baby. They prayed. They waited. They hoped in private because hoping out loud had started to hurt too much. Then finally, after all that waiting, Diane got pregnant. For a few brief months, Marcus walked through life like a man carrying fire in open hands. Then one night, in a hard spring rain, a truck ran a red light and shattered everything. Diane died before Marcus reached the hospital. Their unborn son died with her. People said time would help. They meant well. They were still wrong. Marcus kept moving because standing still felt too much like sinking. He went back to work. He nodded when spoken to. He showed up in church often enough that people stopped worrying he would stop showing up anywhere. But every evening he returned to a house that sounded wrong, with only one set of footsteps. Some nights, without thinking, he would set 4 plates on the table. Then he would stare at them for a while and put 3 back. Reedville knew he had lost his wife. It knew he had lost a child, too. But the town did what towns often do with private pain. It turned it into a simple fact, filed it away, and moved on. Marcus never really did. The phone call that changed Marcus Webb's life came on a Tuesday night in November. What he said, and what he decided before sunrise, is the reason those 3 women drove back to Reedville 10 years later. And I promise you, the moment he made that choice will hit you somewhere deep. He had just come in from a roofing job ahead of a cold front. His supper was canned beans and half a loaf of bread. The kitchen was dim, the house cold, and his back hurt in the old, familiar way. The phone on the wall rang just as he sat down. He almost ignored it. Instead, he picked up and heard a voice he had not heard in years. "Marcus? It's Carol Simmons." Carol had once been one of Diane's closest friends. She now worked with family services in the next county over. Her voice carried the strain of someone who had spent the whole day trying to solve a problem that did not want to be solved. Marcus listened while she explained. 3 sisters, 11, 9, and 6 years old. Their mother had died of an overdose. Their father had vanished years earlier. The girls had been moved from one bad situation to another, and then into temporary state care. Their file was thick with everything that made foster placements difficult: trauma, instability, behavioral concerns, emotional withdrawal. 2 homes had already backed out after reading the reports. Another had offered to take only the youngest. If no emergency placement could be found by morning, the girls would be separated and sent to different counties. Marcus leaned against the kitchen wall and closed his eyes. "Why are you calling me?" he asked. Carol didn't soften the truth. "Because I'm running out of people. And because you're the only man I trust not to look at what they've been through and decide they're too broken to keep together." Marcus let out a long, tired breath. "Carol, I can barely keep my own lights on. I know. I don't have room for 3 children. I know. I don't know the first thing about raising girls. I know that, too." He tightened his grip on the receiver. "Then why me?" There was a pause, and then Carol answered in a voice so quiet he almost missed it. "Because if you say no, they'll still be alive tomorrow. But they won't be together." That sentence went straight through him. Marcus looked around his kitchen. Peeling wallpaper, crooked cabinets, a floor that creaked under his boots. Bills. Quiet. The kind of quiet that had lived with him so long it had become another piece of furniture. He imagined 3 sisters waking up in 3 different places before sunrise, reaching for each other in the dark and finding nobody. By the time Carol arrived close to midnight in a county sedan, Marcus Webb had changed the sheets in the spare room, dragged in an old dresser from storage, and borrowed 2 extra blankets from Miss Evelyn next door without explaining why. He had made his decision. The girls got out of the car slowly. The oldest, Nora, was all bones and caution, with wary eyes too old for 11. The middle child, Sadie, wore anger like armor. Chin lifted, jaw tight, every muscle already braced for disappointment. And the youngest, Claire, clutched a frayed piece of blue fabric in one hand and looked at the ground as if eye contact might cost her something. They did not speak to Marcus. Carol introduced them softly, then handed him a thick folder full of medical notes, school records, and practical warnings that felt laughably small beside the real size of what she was asking him to do. "This can still be temporary," she said quietly on the porch. Marcus looked through the screen door into the dim entryway where the girls stood pressed close together, like a single frightened thing with 3 shadows. "Nothing about tonight feels temporary to them," he said. Carol studied his face. "You can still call me before sunrise if you decide you can't do this." Marcus nodded, but even then, he already knew he would not call. After Carol drove away, silence rushed back in. Marcus opened the door wider and stepped aside. "You're safe here tonight. That's all you need to know right now." Nora looked at him for the first time. Adults had made promises to her before. He could see that knowledge living in her face. She did not believe him. Sadie did not believe him either. Claire looked as though she wanted to, which may have been worse. If you've ever stood in a doorway and said you're safe to someone who had every reason not to trust those words yet, you know exactly what Marcus felt in that moment. Sometimes love asks us to keep showing up before it's been earned. Sometimes it asks us to be patient with someone else's wounds. If you know that feeling, stay with this story, because it's yours too. By noon the next day, Reedville had already decided what to think. At the feed store, men shook their heads and said Marcus meant well, but had no business taking on something like that. At the diner, women lowered their voices and wondered why a man like him would invite that kind of trouble into his home. At church, concern and suspicion braided themselves together and called it wisdom. Marcus heard enough of it to know the rest. At the grocery store, while paying for bread, milk, and the cheapest eggs he could find, he caught 2 men by the register watching him with a look he had known his whole life. "One thing to help out," one of them muttered. "Another thing entirely to bring 3 girls into a house with no mother." Marcus turned slowly until the man had to meet his eyes. He did not raise his voice. He did not cause a scene. He just held the stare long enough for shame to begin its work. Then he paid and went home. That afternoon, Nora found him on the porch mending a loose board. "Are we staying?" she asked. Marcus set down the hammer. "If they'll let you," he said. "Then yes, all 3 of you, together." Nora searched his face for hesitation, for the place where adults usually began to pull away. She didn't find it. Inside the doorway, Sadie was pretending not to listen. Claire stood behind her, holding that blue scrap of cloth in one fist. Marcus looked at all three girls, at the fear, the anger, the need gathered under his patched roof, and felt the full weight of what he had done. Then he made the choice that would break and remake his life. He became their father. The first months nearly broke all four of them. Marcus had thought hunger and hard work were the hardest things a home could endure. He learned quickly that fear was worse. Fear sat at his table, slept in his beds, followed him from room to room, and turned ordinary moments into small battles. A drop pan sent Claire under the kitchen table. A stranger knocking on the door made Nora go rigid. Sadie seemed to wake each morning already angry, as if she needed fresh ammunition before the day could wound her first. Marcus did not know how to be what they needed. The first time he tried to braid Nora's hair before school, his fingers tugged too hard, and she jerked away with fire in her eyes. Sadie laughed at him, then kicked her chair back and announced she was not going to school anyway. Claire stared at her oatmeal, so long it went cold. By 8:30, Marcus was late for work. Nora had tied her own hair back in a crooked ponytail. Sadie had disappeared into the yard. Claire still had not spoken a word. That evening, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed with both elbows on his knees and wondered if Carol had made the worst mistake of her career. Then the next morning, he got up and tried again. He asked the woman at the pharmacy what shampoo girls liked. He stood in the grocery aisle reading cereal boxes as if they were legal documents. He swallowed his pride and asked Miss Evelyn to show him how to part a girl's hair without hurting her scalp. He checked out books from the library about grief, trauma, and raising daughters, as if enough information might close the distance between love and competence. Sometimes it helped. Most days it didn't seem to. Marcus found Nora's emergency bag under her bed by accident one afternoon while fixing a loose floorboard. A canvas bag packed with socks, a flashlight, and a few things she thought her sisters would need when they were sent away again. He never mentioned it. He just tightened the board, slid the bag back where it had been, and felt something inside him ache. Sadie tested every boundary she could find. She stole candy from the gas station and denied it with a straight face while the wrappers still bulged in her pocket. She picked fights at school. She dared Marcus to punish her, watching him the way people watched a lit match near dry grass. Once she smashed a plate against the sink because he told her she couldn't wander the roads after dark. Marcus lost his temper then. He slammed his hand on the counter and shouted her name so sharply that Claire burst into tears. Sadie went pale for half a second, then hard as stone. "There you are," she said. Marcus stopped breathing. He understood at once what she meant. There you are, the real version. The one who yells. The one who scares. The one who turns out to be every other adult after all. Shame hit him like a blow. He sent Nora to sit with Claire, then stood in the kitchen with Sadie and forced himself to lower his voice. "I was wrong to shout at you. You still wanted to." "Yes," he said. "I did." That surprised her. He leaned back against the sink, suddenly tired down to the bone. Wanting to and doing it aren't the same thing. "I'm still learning. That's not my problem." "No," Marcus said softly. "It's mine." She did not apologize. He did not ask her to. But that night, when he looked into her room before bed, the shards of the broken plate she had hidden under the bed were gone. Something was about to happen in that little house on Willow Lane that would change everything between Marcus and those three girls. But first, it would nearly destroy him. And the note those girls left beside his bed during the worst night of it? I'm going to read it to you word for word. You need to hear every line. Claire was harder in a different way. She didn't fight. She didn't run. She simply folded inward whenever the world pressed too close. Marcus found her in closets, under tables, in corners, anywhere small enough to feel safe. She barely spoke to him. Some days she barely spoke at all. One rainy night, Marcus woke to the sound of muffled crying. He found her wrapped in a blanket on the hallway floor, eyes wide in the dark. He sat down across from her without touching her. Rain tapped the windows. The house creaked around them. Finally, Marcus said, "I know this house sounds strange when it rains. My old roof always argues with the weather." Claire blinked. "It never wins," he added. A tiny sound escaped her then. Not quite a laugh, but close enough to keep him sitting there another hour. That became the beginning of the first ritual. Every night before bed, Marcus walked through the house, checking every lock, every window, every door. And at the end of each round, he stopped outside their rooms and said the same sentence in the same steady voice. "You're safe tonight." He said it so often the words settled into the walls. The second ritual started by accident. Marcus began saving with scraps from job sites and carving them at the kitchen table after the girls went to bed. He had learned whittling from his father as a boy. The old man used to say rough wood didn't need pity. It needed patience and a steady hand. He shaped simple little birds first. Claire was the first to notice. She stood beside the table watching him shave thin curls off a block of pine and asked in a whisper, "What is it?" Marcus looked up so fast he nearly cut himself. It was the first full sentence she had spoken to him. "A bird," he said carefully. Claire moved one step closer. "Can it fly?" "Not this one." "Why not?" "Because I'm still working on the wings." Claire considered that, solemn as a judge, then nodded as if the answer made perfect sense. Then winter came hard. A storm hit Reedville faster than predicted. By sundown, snow was blowing sideways and the power cut out completely. Marcus fed the wood stove, piled blankets in the living room, and tried to make an adventure of it. For a while it worked. Sadie made animal shadows by lantern light. Nora read aloud from an old library book. Claire curled under a quilt with a wooden bird in her hand. Then a tree limb cracked outside with a sound like a gunshot. Claire screamed. In the confusion, the stove popping, Sadie shouting, Nora leaping to her feet, Claire bolted for the back door. By the time Marcus hit the porch, she was already lost in the white dark. He ran without thinking. Snow came nearly to his knees in places. Wind knifed through his coat. He shouted Claire's name until his throat burned. He found her near the drainage ditch behind the house, half buried, too terrified even to cry. Marcus dropped to his knees, pulled her into his coat, and carried her home against his chest, bent over her as the wind beat his back. By morning, Claire was safe under blankets by the stove. Marcus was not. The cough started before sunrise and worsened by noon. Carol drove over and took one look at him. The word she used was pneumonia. Marcus tried to wave her off. He had no money for hospitals and no time to lie down. His body made the decision for him. By evening, he could barely stand. For 4 days, he drifted in and out of fever while Nora, Sadie, and Claire took turns orbiting his bed in frightened silence. Nora cooked what she could. Sadie brought water without being asked. Claire sat at the doorway, clutching the blue wooden bird, staring at Marcus as though watching him might keep him from disappearing. On the worst night, Marcus opened his eyes to find all 3 girls asleep on the floor of his room. A note lay on the crate beside his bed in Nora's careful handwriting. "Please get better. We're still here." Below it, in Sadie's rougher letters, "Don't you dare die." And under that, in small, uncertain print from Claire, "Home waiting." Marcus turned his face to the wall and wept where they could not see him. Some of you watching right now have been Nora. You've written a version of that note, maybe not on paper, but in your heart, for someone you were terrified of losing. You know what it costs to need someone that much and not be sure they'll stay. This story is for you. After the storm, something changed for good. Claire began reaching for Marcus's hand when loud sounds startled her. Sadie stopped looking for reasons to be thrown away. Nora unpacked the emergency bag from under her bed and folded the clothes into her dresser. For the first time since Diane died, laughter lived in Marcus's house often enough to surprise him. It happened over Sunday stew. It happened when Sadie made fun of his terrible pancakes. It happened when Nora looked up from her homework one evening and asked, almost casually, "You coming to the school recital, Dad?" Marcus had to turn away to hide his face. By spring, Carol encouraged Marcus to file for permanent adoption. The paperwork terrified him more than the girls ever had. Forms asked him to reduce love to income, square footage, references, and medical history. He filled them out anyway. Teachers wrote letters. The school counselor wrote one, too. Even the pastor, who had once quietly doubted him, signed a statement praising the stability of the home. Marcus tried not to hope too much. That was when Evelyn Mercer arrived. She came to Reedville in a black sedan, wearing polished shoes and a cream coat too fine for the roads in that part of town. She was the girls' maternal grandmother, though she had never once come looking for them before. She was not a cartoon villain. That would have made things easier. She was composed, intelligent, wealthy, and very sure she knew what was best. Her first visit to Marcus's house was polite enough to feel cold. "I appreciate what you've done," Evelyn said, "but these girls deserve opportunities you cannot provide. Better schools, proper care, security." "They have care here," Marcus said. "They have affection here," Evelyn corrected. "That is not the same thing. It matters to them, and so does blood." Nora spoke before he could answer. "You didn't care about blood when Mama was alive." For the first time, something cracked across Evelyn's face. Within 2 weeks, she had hired lawyers. What followed was a careful, organized dismantling of Marcus Webb's worth. Evelyn's side brought financial records, property assessments, school plans, medical coverage, and expert testimony about long-term stability. Carol fought where she could. The school counselor testified that the girls were bonded to Marcus and improving. Miss Evelyn next door wrote a letter saying that in all her 72 years, she had rarely seen children look at a man the way those girls looked at Marcus when they were scared. It was not enough. The system did not deny Marcus's love. It simply chose what looked safer on paper. The final decision came in early summer. Marcus stood in a room too clean to hold that much grief and listened while a woman in a gray suit explained, with practiced sympathy, that the girls would be placed with their grandmother. Evelyn Mercer, as a biological relative with substantial resources and a long-term care plan, would assume custody. Marcus Webb, though commendable, remained a temporary guardian whose housing and finances were too precarious to guarantee the girl's future. Commendable. The word nearly made him laugh. Outside, Nora read the answer on his face before he said anything. Sadie started swearing and didn't stop until Carol pulled her aside. Claire clung to Marcus's shirt so hard the buttons strained. "No," she whispered. Then louder, breaking from someplace deep inside her, "No." Marcus dropped to his knees and held her while his own heart came apart. He wanted to promise he would fix it. He wanted to tell them no court on earth could take them from him. But he had promised safety, and this was the first time safety had slipped through his hands. The day they left, half the town watched from porches and yards as though sorrow were a parade. Nora carried one suitcase and the face of someone forcing herself not to collapse. Sadie cried openly, wiping at her cheeks with furious embarrassment. Claire had to be gently pried loose from Marcus one finger at a time. Marcus crouched in front of them, trying to keep his voice steady enough to be remembered. "This is not because of you," he told them. Nora's mouth trembled. "Then why does it feel like it is?" He had no answer fit for a child. Sadie shoved something into his palm before turning away. It was the blue wooden bird, one wing chipped from being dropped during the winter storm. Claire pressed her forehead to his chest. "You come?" "I'll try." He meant it, and for a while he did. Marcus wrote letters, first to all 3 girls together, then separately when that felt too crowded for grief. He told them small things, because small things were safer than heartbreak. He told Nora the stray dog still came to the porch every morning. He told Sadie the principal had retired and probably still deserved one good scare. He told Claire the mockingbird still nested in the maple tree every spring. He never wrote, "I still set 4 bowls on the table by mistake." He never wrote, "They didn't only take you from me. They took the life I had finally dared to imagine." Some letters came back unopened. Some vanished into silence. He drove once to Evelyn Mercer's estate in the city, wearing his cleanest shirt and carrying the wooden bird in the glove compartment like a prayer. He got no farther than the gate. A woman in a navy coat informed him politely and firmly that the girls were unavailable and any contact had to go through legal channels. Marcus stood there 1 minute longer than dignity allowed. Then he drove home. He later learned that Carol had managed to get a few letters through during the first year, but after that, communication tightened. Evelyn controlled phone access, mail, and visits. By the time the girls were older, they had been told Marcus stopped writing. Marcus, meanwhile, believed they had moved on and no longer wished to reopen old wounds. Distance did the work shame and pride had begun. So he stopped trying ways that could be stopped by gates and lawyers. He never stopped loving them. Years passed. Marcus's body began collecting debts. The pneumonia had left him weaker than he admitted. Roofing jobs got harder on his knees. Cold weather settled into his hands and stayed there. A pain in his chest came and went often enough that he learned to ignore it. Money slipped through his fingers faster than he could catch it. He sold the old truck and bought a cheaper one. He took smaller jobs. He kept the girls' rooms mostly untouched. Nora's books remained on the shelf. Sadie's dresser still had one drawer that never shut right. Claire's bed stayed beneath the window where morning light came in soft and gold. Every Sunday night, Marcus made stew. And every night before bed, he walked through the house, checking every lock, every window, every door. "You're safe tonight," he said, to empty rooms. While Marcus Webb talked to empty rooms on Willow Lane, somewhere across the state, three young women were piecing together the truth. What they discovered when they finally compared notes is the reason those black SUVs came back to Reedville, and what Nora said the moment she stepped to the microphone, in front of the whole town, will take your breath away. Elsewhere, the girls grew up. They had better schools, better clothes, and every resource money could buy. But money can build comfort faster than it can build belonging. Nora was the first to understand exactly what had happened to them. In college, she studied political science and family law, then landed an internship with a child advocacy nonprofit. She was not yet a lawyer, but she had already learned how court files flatten people into facts, and how often systems confused wealth for love and biology for devotion. She became the kind of young woman who walked into offices with a notebook, a sharp mind, and a refusal to let anyone talk over frightened children. Sadie survived adolescence the hard way. Anger stayed with her longer than anyone wanted. She fought, skipped class, nearly ruined her future twice, and only changed course when a contractor took one look at her and told her she could either keep blowing up her own life or learn how to build something with those hands. She worked on a skilled repair crew, became the youngest crew lead in her company, and knew how to rebuild a roof, frame a wall, and spot bad wiring from across a room. At 19, she was not some polished success story. She was better. She was real. Claire carried the deepest quiet into her teen years. For a long time, she startled at raised voices, hated locked doors, and couldn't sleep through storms. But she also remembered every kindness she had ever been shown. That memory pulled her toward children who were frightened and hurting. She volunteered at a pediatric ward through a youth outreach program and had a gift for sitting beside scared kids without rushing them. She didn't have a job title yet. She had something more important. She knew how to make broken children feel less alone. They did not all heal the same way. They did not become polished miracles. But they never forgot Marcus Webb. The reunion between the sisters came before the reunion with him. Nora reached Claire first after leaving for college. Sadie took longer, mostly because pride is just pain in louder clothes. Over time, they began comparing memories, dates, names, the stories they had been told. The picture that emerged made all three of them furious. Marcus had written, Carol, now close to retirement, still had copies of several letters in an old file. She also had notes from phone calls Marcus had made in the early years, trying to ask after the girls without making trouble he couldn't fight. It became painfully clear he had not abandoned them. He had been managed out of their lives. Then Evelyn Mercer died in late spring. She left money, property, and carefully worded apologies that arrived too late to comfort anyone. She also left records, old correspondence, unsent letters, instructions, and decisions that looked respectable on paper and devastating in real life. Over the months that followed, Nora, Sadie, and Claire read everything. By the time summer gave way to September, they knew enough to understand the full truth. Marcus Webb had not lost them. They had all been lost from each other. So they went looking for him. Reedville looked smaller than they remembered. The houses leaned more. The roads seemed narrower. The town still wore its judgments in all the familiar places: diner counters, hardware store aisles, church steps, front porches where people mistook gossip for concern. They learned before sunset that Marcus was in trouble. His mortgage was months behind. Medical bills had piled up after a hospital stay he had told no one about. The roof leaked again. He had cut back on work because his heart was not good and his hands stiffened badly in cold weather. A bank notice had been posted and torn down, but not before half the town saw it. That was when the sisters made a decision. They would not slip quietly back into Reedville. They would come home in a way the whole town would be forced to see. Nora borrowed a black SUV from the nonprofit director she worked for, a woman who believed in making an entrance when the truth had been ignored too long. Sadie brought a second vehicle through her construction company. Claire came with Carol in a third. By the time they reached Willow Lane, the effect was exactly what Nora intended. Every person who had once watched Marcus fail in public now watched his daughter's return. Marcus stood on the porch staring at them, as if the years had folded in half. Nora took a step forward first. "Daddy," the word broke him. He came down the porch steps carefully, as though the air itself had become fragile. He looked at Nora, then Sadie, then Claire. His mouth moved before his voice came. "Nora?" She nodded, already crying. "Sadie?" "Yeah, Daddy," Sadie said, and the tough edge of her voice cracked wide open. Claire held out the wooden bird with both hands. "We came home," she whispered. Marcus covered his mouth, but it did nothing to stop the sound that came out of him. It was not really a sob. It was the breaking open of 10 years. They crossed the yard at once. Nora wrapped her arms around his neck like she was 11 again and had just survived another hearing room. Sadie folded around them next, strong and shaking. Claire pressed in last, her face against his shoulder, the wooden bird trapped between them. Marcus held his daughters and wept in front of the whole town. This time, he did not care who saw. Inside, the years collapsed all at once. The rooms were smaller than the sisters remembered and emptier than they should have been. Claire found prescription bottles lined up beside the sink. Sadie went silent when she saw the tarp in the attic catching rainwater. Nora stood in the kitchen staring at a table set with one bowl and one spoon. "Why didn't you call us?" she asked at last. Marcus lowered himself carefully into a chair. "I didn't know if you wanted your lives reopened because of me." Sadie made a strangled sound of disbelief. "Because of you? We spent years trying to figure out how to get back to you." Claire knelt beside him and took his rough hand between both of hers. "You never lost us," she said. "We were the ones who got taken." That afternoon, they started doing what children do for a father they love. Not performing gratitude, not offering charity, taking care. Nora made calls to the bank, county offices, and a doctor in the city. She found errors in the mortgage handling and negotiated time Marcus had not known he still had. Sadie walked the perimeter of the house, inspected the roof, the porch, the steps, the plumbing, and the warped back wall, then called her crew before Marcus had fully accepted what was happening. By sunset, she had a materials list, a repair order, and a plan. Claire checked his medication, blood pressure, eating habits, and follow-up care, then informed him with gentle authority that surviving alone was not the same thing as living well. Marcus protested all of it. The girls ignored him with the united ease of daughters who had inherited his stubbornness, and finally learned how to use it against him. Word spread through Reedville fast. The women in the black SUVs were Marcus Webb's girls. By the end of the week, the whole town wanted details. The mayor, smelling redemption and headlines, invited them to speak at the fall community gathering. Nora accepted before anyone else could answer. The whole town showed up. Marcus sat in the front row wearing a suit he had not touched in years. It hung loose on him now, but Claire had pressed it. Sadie had repaired one cuff. Nora had bought him a new tie on the drive-in. When Nora stepped to the microphone, the crowd quieted. She did not smile. 10 years ago, she said, this town watched a poor black man taking 3 little girls everyone else had already decided were too damaged, too difficult, or too inconvenient to keep together. No one moved. He did it with no promise of reward, no guarantee of success, no protection from gossip, no power except the kind that comes from refusing to leave children behind. She turned and looked directly at Marcus. He was our father long before any court would have allowed the word. Sadie spoke next. When people here said he wasn't enough, what they really meant was he didn't have enough money. What they missed is that he gave us the one thing nobody else gave us first. She paused. He stayed. Claire stepped up last, her voice soft but clear enough to carry to the back row. He used to walk through the house every night and say, "You're safe tonight." We believed him before we believed almost anyone. By then, people in the audience were crying. including some who had once stood on porches and watched Marcus's pain from a safe distance. Then Nora announced the final part. Together, the three sisters were funding a new family support center in Reedville for low-income foster and kinship placements, especially siblings at risk of being separated. It would provide emergency help with housing, legal guidance, trauma counseling, school coordination, and short-term support for families willing to keep children together when the system made that hard. The name on the building would be the Marcus Webb House. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the room rose. Marcus stood only because Sadie and Claire took his arms. He looked out at the town that had once mistaken his poverty for emptiness and his gentleness for weakness. Then he looked at his daughters and seemed to understand that the life he had lost had not vanished after all. Part of it had simply traveled through 10 long years to find its way home again. That night, four bowls sat on the kitchen table. The stew was thicker than it had been in years. The roof did not leak when evening rain started. Laughter moved through the house like it had never fully left. Before bed, Marcus checked the locks out of habit. When he turned, all three daughters were watching him from the hallway. Old instinct met old love. "You're safe tonight," he said. Claire smiled through shining eyes. "No, Daddy," she answered. "Tonight, you are." And maybe that was the whole truth of it. Fatherhood had never belonged to the richest man in the room, or the one with the right last name, or the one the town found easiest to trust. It belonged to the man who opened a door when he had almost nothing, and still made room. The man who learned by failing, who stayed when staying cost him everything, who kept loving even after the world called that love insufficient. Marcus Webb did not change the world. He changed three girls' worlds. And those three girls, Nora, Sadie, and Claire, changes right back. If this story stayed with you, it was supposed to. Because Marcus Webb isn't a fairy tale. He's every person who has ever chosen to show up for someone when they had every reason not to. He's the mother who kept going after her heart was broken. He's the grandmother who said yes when no one else would. He's every woman and man who ever decided that love was a verb, not a feeling, and acted accordingly. I want to know something. Has someone ever stayed for you when they didn't have to? Or maybe you've been that person for someone else. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about ordinary people doing the kind of things that quietly change everything, hit that subscribe button. We put out a new story every single week. I'll see you in the next one.